Into the Enchanted Forest, Book 1 of the Enchanted Forest series, written by Alicia J. Chumney. Chapter 2. The bridge was wider than Gabby expected. When Jack had called it a bridge, she had imagined one of those single-file wooden bridges. This bridge made her think of a Central Park bridge that a car could easily drive over. They both stood there in awe at the smooth gray stones and the drop that was hidden by a misty fog. That fog easily covered half of the bridge, obscuring the other side. I guess this is your first quest, Jack sighed. The forest would do something like this. Hush, she hissed. I'm thinking. Jack paced back and forth as Gabby pondered this predicament. If he was annoying her, then she did not show it. Looking back and forth between the stone bridge and the forest, Gabby cautiously stated, "The forest won't let us pass until I identify the story." "Correct," he curtly answered her, not liking this latest development. "So I have to cross the bridge." Gabby paused. "What's the worst that can happen?" Before she could move in any direction, Jack blocked her. "I have to tell you something." "Okay?" she cautiously asked him while trying to look past him and at the bridge. Curiosity burned at her, and she felt an overwhelming urge to discover what the forest wanted her to uncover. While trying to predict her next move, he carefully skirted the information that he dreaded having to tell her. "You cannot cross this bridge. If you get stuck in a time loop, then the kingdom will suffer." "I doubt it is that big of a deal." She tried to push forward, but Jack blocked her. "It is. Your mother is ill. Some of the doctors think that she is dying." Jack repeated what his father had told him before Jack was sent to find and retrieve the princess. He never thought to question why, if there was such a sense of urgency about Gabby's return, he needed to spend so much time away in the other realm, and why Gabby would still be going on her quest for an unidentified period of time. Gabby dropped down in the dirt. "And yet I still have to quest." Coldly, as if he disagreed with the forest's decisions, he answered her, "Yes." Using a tone that was a decent impression of Jack's dry tones, she mumbled, "Great." After looking at the fog-engulfed bridge for several minutes, Gabby took a deep breath. "Come along, Jack. We have a quest to complete." The forest would not push me in this direction, knowing that it could lead to the destruction of its trees. For a brief moment, the trees trembled in fear before straightening back into place. "This is not about getting pulled into temptations. This is about resisting and being able to problem solve," Gabby thought aloud, trying to explain to Jack what this quest was really about. "Stay behind me. I'll walk close enough to be able to identify this island, and if I get stuck, you will pull me back through." Jack nodded his head in understanding. His instincts told him to walk in front of her in case there were any creepy three-headed fog monsters that had a taste for monarchs. He also knew that he needed to listen to his leader. It was not an easy position for him since he was used to being the leader himself. Gabby felt the barrier between the two lands. There was a slight resistance as she pushed through, her body slowly disappearing with each step forward. "Can you hear me?" she carefully asked Jack, not liking what she was hearing on her own end. A persistent buzzing started forming in her ears, and she could barely understand his answer. "Barely. You sound foggy." It had taken only a few steps past the center of the bridge for Gabby to know what story they were about to enter. "This is the Giver, or at least how I always pictured the town. And if we aren't allowed back across the bridge, we could be here for years, depending on if it's book 1 or all 4 books. And you made it sound as if my mother doesn't have time to produce another daughter." Gabby stared longingly at this new world that she was more than tempted to enter. It had been a favorite story of hers for years. She had watched the movie at least 10 times, picking out the details that varied from the books and dissecting them as she tried to figure out if it took away or added to the story. Finally, "Slide your hand through and pull me out," she commanded, hoping he could hear her. Thankfully, his hand slid through the barrier shortly after her order. Gabby clasped Jack's hand, and she felt him trying to tug her forward, but his hand and her body would not move. Letting go, she watched as Jack started to swear. His hand stuck between the two stories. The bridge declared that he could only move forward. Finally, he caved and joined her on the story's side. She warily looked back and forth between the story she'd identified and the barrier preventing their return. If I already identified the story, and we were still on the bridge, do we still have to enter the story? I do not know, Jack answered worriedly. Why? He was staring fascinated at the black and white landscape that revealed an occasional glimpse of red. He then mentally added this to the series of questions that had been forming ever since he had learned about the bridges and their various tales. Carefully, she explained, because Plan A just failed. The problem was that the bridge didn't want them to go back across to the enchanted forest. They walked right into the barrier that was in the middle of the bridge. No amount of pushing would make the nearly invisible barrier budge. Jack laughed as Gabby recited passwords from as many books and stories that she could remember. When he made some pillows and blankets randomly appear, Gabby was distracted for a moment, asking for explanations, and was unsatisfied with his "magic is everywhere" explanation. It wasn't an hour later when Gabby struggled to wake up. The hard stone was finally making itself known underneath the ridiculously soft pillows and blankets. It's all a dream, she thought. Yes, it was all a dream. Everything that Ethan Clark told her about being adopted and her having to magically return to her real home because her mother was dying was nothing but a dream, even if the bedding was softer than it should be at home. That didn't matter. This was a dream. She was at home with her parents, Preston and Michaela Harrington. She was in the middle of winter break, and that was why her room was so chilly. She had accidentally left her bedroom window open, and a cold front had come through. Yes, that had to be the right explanation. Opening her eyes, the first thing Gabby did was let out a scream. It wasn't a dream. She wasn't at home with her parents. She was 21 years old and facing her first Enchanted Forest trial while standing on a bridge between two not so fictional worlds. Jerking upright, Jack speedily pulled a dagger out of his boot. What? Is there a three-headed fog monster? She could have continued on into that fictional world, knowing that she could get stuck there and evade her responsibility as the next Queen of Wonderland, or she could find a way off the bridge that held her hostage. Jack, still worried, unknowingly started acting more like Ethan than his huntsman counterpart. What's wrong? Ignoring him, Gabby started to think. Even she knew that the easy trials were given first. They were designed to lull the quester into a false sense of security. It was written into almost every single fairy tale she had ever read. It was tradition. Was the Enchanted Forest powered more on tradition or the tales that broke traditions? Without thinking, she started hitting Jack as she released her frustration against the questions she couldn't answer. Hitting the bridge would result in broken bones, and she suspected that Jack wouldn't stop her. Whoa, wait, it's only me, Jack grumbled, holding his arms out against her sleepy assault. Calm down. You mean all of this wasn't a dream? Gabby plopped back down on a blanket and wrapped her arms around herself. I really am a Wonderland princess and heir to a throne in a land that I always thought was a fictional children's story. I was adopted when I was 2 years old, and my adoptive parents never felt the need to tell me that someday I would vanish in a puff of smoke. We did not disappear in a puff of smoke. Only caterpillars do that, Jack interrupted, settling down next to her, but not touching the princess in fear of what she would unleash next. Ignoring him, Gabby continued with her rant. Leaving my identity behind with everything that I ever thought was fact or fiction, thought was my biological family is waiting for me, and my biological mother is apparently dying, and I might miss her while I'm on this quest because I'm stranded on a bridge that refuses to let me pass because of some stupid idea that I have to get sucked into a story that I already know and have identified. Who knows how long I'll be stuck here when I should be completing my quest and spending time with my dying mother? Why can't this be a dream? I'm afraid it's not. While he was looking at her, he missed what was happening behind them. What? Gabby asked, jerking backward as if noticing that Jack was there for the first time since her rambling tirade began. This caused her to fall backward and through the barrier that she was leaning against. The barrier is gone, she whispered, stunned. Then let us get out of here before it decides to reform. With a snap of his fingers, Jack made all the bedding disappear as they hurried back to the seemingly never-ending forest side of the bridge. Can you bring those blankets and pillows so that we can get back to sleep? Gabby asked when they were firmly on solid ground. They couldn't see the path in the dark, and all she wanted to do was go back to sleep after the exhaustive verbal purge that did very little to calm her ragged emotions. Grinning, he took the opportunity to try to show her a little about what she was capable of doing. You could try it yourself. Maybe later, she yawned as a pillow appeared in her arms. Gabby was tired enough to not realize that she'd summoned the pillow herself. Jack stayed awake a little while longer as he tried to figure out what it was the princess had said that had caused the barrier to vanish. Finally giving up, he summoned his own pillow and blanket, tucked the dagger underneath the bedding, and fell into a restless sleep. He was her protector and needed to remain on guard. About an hour later, he suddenly sat up. The reason why Gabby had passed her quest had occurred to him. She had shown where her priorities stood.